There's a match.
Wow.
Blimey!
The DNA evidence points to this being Richard III.
Welcome to WatchMojo, and today we're counting down our picks for the most mysterious medieval events or discoveries that have modern explanations, or at least theories.
Photography meant that the image of the shroud could travel far and wide, and interest in it began to grow around the world.
Number 7. The Dancing Plague of 1518. Dancing can be a lot of fun, but how about dancing for days until you died? As bizarre as it sounds, the Dancing Plague of 1518 was an event in Strasbourg, modern-day France, where between 50 and 400 people reportedly danced uncontrollably for weeks. There are a few theories that might explain the event. The first is that it was the result of stress-induced mass hysteria, caused by hardship and superstition. An alternative theory is that it was a severe case of food poisoning from contaminated grain carrying ergot fungus. This poisoning could have produced powerful hallucinations, convulsions, and spasms. Number 6. The disappearance of the Greenland Vikings. In the 9th century, Norse Icelanders settled on Greenland's southwestern coast. It was a harsh environment, but they managed to eke out a living.
He spread the word of this new land that he has discovered, and he called it Greenland as a way of attracting people to come there and settle with him.
A few hundred years later, the ancestors of the Greenlandic Inuit also settled on the chilly island. But sometime after the 14th century, the Greenland Vikings disappeared, while the Inuit survived. There are several possible causes. One is the Little Ice Age, a period of regional cooling around that time. Another is the Black Death. While the Black Death didn't reach Greenland, it could have disrupted trade with Europeans, which the Norse relied on for essential goods.
We think this is a potential here for causing catastrophic loss of life in Greenland.
Trade could also have been impacted by the declining value of ivory, due to an influx of ivory into Europe from Russia and Africa. Number 5. The Bocksten Man. The Bocksten Man is an incredibly well-preserved body of a young man found in a Swedish peat bog in 1936. The mystery of his discovery focused on when and how this man died. Modern forensic analysis has since determined that he was between 25 and 35 years old and lived in the 14th century. Based on the hood he wore, he may have had high social standing. The evidence suggests he was brutally murdered, struck 3 times on the head and thrown into the bog. His body had been impaled with wooden poles to keep it from resurfacing. Why, however, remains a mystery. Number 4. The Vinland Map. While this isn't actually from medieval times, it was initially purported to be.
At this stage, the map is bound up with another document. A handwritten copy of a book by a 13th century explorer.
First circulated in 1957, the Vinland Map was supposedly a 15th century world map featuring Africa, Asia, Europe, and part of North America labeled Vinland.
There's no denying that it says something extraordinary. That only 50 years before Columbus, somebody knew of the new land that the Vikings had found.
This map raised major questions about whether the Vikings could have had knowledge of North America before Christopher Columbus. We now know that they did, thanks to excavations in the 1960s of a Norse settlement on the island of Newfoundland. But in 2018, the Vinland Map was identified as a forgery, thanks to careful study of the ink and parchment.
Is about more than reading the words. It's reading the parchment and the ink and the 100 tiny signs which tell you where a document has been.
It had in fact been created in the 20th century. Number 3. The Shroud of Turin. Purportedly the burial shroud of Jesus Christ. The Shroud of Turin has been an object of controversy ever since it emerged in 14th century France.
The Shroud of Turin is this amazing relic. At bottom, it's a piece of cloth. It shows a very faint sort of image of a crucified man.
Although denounced as a forgery soon after, it's been preserved and revered in Turin Cathedral, Italy. In 1988, scientists employed radiocarbon dating techniques on the shroud's fibers, determining its origin to be between 1260 and 1390 AD.
A group of scientists were able to get permission to get a sample from the shroud and to subject it to radiocarbon dating. And then they announced with a 95% degree of certainty that the shroud was medieval.
This placed the shroud squarely in the Middle Ages, indicating it was likely not the burial cloth of Christ, but rather a product of medieval craftsmanship. While there are still those of faith who choose to believe that the shroud covered Jesus, science contends that it's a medieval forgery.
The shroud can never replace faith. I don't think we can ever know for sure whether the shroud is absolutely authentic because we don't have the DNA of Jesus to match it up with something that we might extract from the shroud itself.
Number 2. King Richard III's lost remains. For centuries, the whereabouts of King Richard III's final resting place remained a medieval mystery. Having died in the Battle of Bosworth in 1485, he was buried in Greyfriars Church.
Back in 2012, thanks to funding from the Richard III Society, they decided to try and find their king, believed buried on the former site of the Greyfriars Church, but it had long since been destroyed.
However, the exact location of the church and his grave were lost due to King Henry VIII's dissolution of the monasteries in the 16th century. The enigma came to an end in 2012 when archaeologists uncovered a skeleton beneath the asphalt of a humble parking lot in Leicester, England.
It was an extraordinary discovery that stunned all of us.
It was enough to attract the attention of the world press.
The remains were identified as the long-lost king during DNA analyses, comparing the DNA against that of Richard III's descendants.
Michael is the missing genetic royal link to King Richard III they were looking for.
I am a 17th generation nephew.
So that's nephew 17 times removed?
Yes.
This breakthrough not only solved the centuries-old puzzle of the long-lost monarch, but also revealed the lost location of the Greyfriars Church. Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into your settings and switch on notifications. Number 1. The cause of the Black Death. For centuries, the causes of the Black Death, a catastrophic epidemic that struck Western Eurasia and North Africa in the 14th century, were unknown.
After trade routes brought plague from Asia, where it killed millions in China and the Middle East, the disease wiped out about a third of Europe's population, earning itself the moniker, the Black Death.
Peaking in the late 1340s and early 50s, it killed an estimated 75 to 200 million people. At the time, people struggled to make sense of what must have seemed truly apocalyptic, suggesting that a conjunction of planets had released bad air or that it was just God's will.
For most of human history, the cause of illnesses, germs, was unknown, making sicknesses like the plague a mystery.
We now know that the bacterium Yersinia pestis, transmitted by fleas on black rats, was to blame. This discovery resolved a long-standing mystery about this medieval pandemic's source. Today, the infection is treatable with antibiotics. Are there any medieval mysteries you'd like answers to? Tell us in the comments.
Since the Vinland Map first surfaces in 1957, our evidence supports the assertion that other investigators have made that it was created at some point between the 1920s and the mid-1950s.